Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for being here. I'm very aware of the fact that 40 minutes goes by really, really fast. So let's just jump right into things. I'm just going to gloss over a few little background sort of slides to set a bit of backstory here. We know that web pages are bigger than they've ever been and more complex than they've ever been. According to the HTTP archive, in the summer, we found that the typical page was almost 1,700 kilobytes in size, had about 100 objects. And actually, according to my most recent look into the HTTP archive, which one should never try to say fast, we're looking at over a meg worth of images on a typical page, and this is really, really huge. So we know, if you're in this room, you don't need me to tell you that images represent this hugely fertile ground for optimization. We should all care about images. Almost make them kind of top of our priority list. So I borrowed your post title, Pat. Progressive JPEGs for the win. There's a lot of people who stand behind the idea that progressive JPEGs are a really great best practice, and at Radware we have been one of those groups. Again, probably don't need to show you this. This is a baseline optimized image. This is where you see the image loading line by line, and then progressive image. Where you see it rendering from, as you see, like kind of progressive layers from fuzzy resolution to sharp resolution. And thanks to Stoyan for letting me borrow these images from his book, The Book of Speed, where he writes about this quite extensively. One of the things that Stoyan writes about is the fact that in his study, images that are 10K and over actually are smaller if they're served as progressive JPEGs. The format makes a difference just in terms of in terms of image file size. And Pat has found something similar, where he saw a median speed index improvement of up to 15% on progressive optimized images. So this sort of dovetails nicely with something that we've always felt intuitively, which is that perceived speed is more important than actual speed. Appearing faster is better than being faster. So if we can basically push pixels to the browser earlier and have people seeing something on the page rather than delaying that at all, it just makes sense. This whole technique makes lots of sense.
Would everybody agree that we all sort of think that the faster we can put anything on the screen, let's just show the user something, we're doing something, right? That's always been, intuitively what we've focused on.
And yet, what we have found, and what Pat found, and others have found, is that looking at various large groups of websites, basically between 5 to 7% of those sites actually use progressive JPEGs effectively, and they score a big fat F in their page speed score. So we wanted to look at, why? We push this technique, and we feel intuitively that it's a good, worthwhile technique that sites should adopt. So we wanted to actually kind of test this and actually see, how is user engagement affected by various types of rendering formats? So I'm going to let Kent talk about the 3 that we decided to focus on for our study.
Yeah. So what we wanted to do was go farther than just faster is better, and take a look at, let's investigate some of the techniques. So what we did is constructed a baseline of some original images from sites. The sites that you'll see, we had to change the images for some of their emotional content value, because in the psychological study you'll see that we needed images that were very evocative to get the changes we wanted and the noticeable changes in people's faces. But we started with this baseline original image from various sites around the internet. We wanted to compare with what we called perfect image. This was a WEPI image, where the idea was that the structural similarity index was 0.985. So what we considered so close that we could not tell it from the original. But it was designed to be as small as it could while still being the same. So it's not going to present itself progressively, but it's going to come onto the screen in the smallest size. And we called it, this is what we thought, let's have the perfect image that looks the same but is the smallest, okay? It happened to be a WEPI format image. And then we wanted to compare against a progressive JPEG. So we then encoded it as progressive JPEG, and we essentially embedded it in 3 different sites and started going through this experiment. So we will post the actual videos that users saw for people to go through. That the point of this is scientific. We're trying to present data here. We don't pretend that we understand all the truths that were exposed by the experiment, but here is what we started with. We wanted to explore what did users think was best.
So we had 2 different tests. One was a facial action coding test, which we're going to focus on mostly today, and the second test, which was more of a secondary test, just to kind of test our assumptions from a different angle, was an implicit reaction test, and we'll go into that in just a little bit of detail later on. So facial action coding testing is predicated on this idea that there are 6 universal facial expressions, and you can see some of them right here. Sadness, happiness, anger, fear, etc. And the one that we wanted to focus on was the one that correlates to engagement, which is happiness. And it's not happiness as in, I'm feeling a feeling of utter joy while I'm looking at this website. It's more just, I'm happy, as opposed to sad or neutral.
Or frustrated.
Or any of the other facial expressions. And so this test, for this particular test, we had 280 respondents, a 50-50 breakdown by gender. We tested 3 different websites, all 3 image loading methods on each of the websites for a total of 9 different videos. And people randomly were served a different video from their home. They watched it from their home computer that was webcam enabled. The webcam gathered the video of their face, and then it analyzed all the video from all of our testers, sorted into the groups depending on which experience they received, aggregated it, and then it comes up with averages. And just further to Kent's point, these pages weren't the actual websites themselves. We took sample pages from 3 different sites, and then replaced them with our own images, which we formatted to suit the test. And so for the results, what we're looking at is really, in a lot of cases, kind of 2 to 3% minimum is considered statistically significant for variation. So in some cases it was a bit higher than that, but that's sort of the threshold that we're looking at. And then we also did a heart rate metric where the same software actually can analyze subtleties in your heart rate as it's exhibited in your face. Your face actually pulses red underneath certain types of, the software can actually figure out what these pulses are, when these pulses are occurring. And it's actually kind of freaky to look at if you look at a regular person and see this red kind of appearing and disappearing.
They magnify your face by 150 times, and you can then see the pulses. An obvious question is, why didn't you use more formats? There's lots of formats on the internet. It was expensive. We had to choose, and the amount of money that goes into an experiment like this just is multiplied by the more cases you have to test. So we tried to just test the fundamentals here.
So just to get a sense of what users were seeing, and just as in terms of static pages, we took a page from the Gap and again replaced it with our own images in the formats that we just talked about. Also a greeting card site called Moonpig, and then a sample page from YouTube. And in each of these instances, the images were selected to evoke a response, because we obviously wanted to choose the most evocative images possible. So here we have cute babies, and there was a lot of discussion about these babies. Are they actually really cute? Are they, I'm glad the parents of these babies weren't able to hear our debates about which babies made the cut. And then same deal with the animals. We just, and the pictures on the Moonpig site, we just tried to pick pictures that were kind of goofy or fun or interesting. And then with the YouTube site, it was just all funny cats all the way down. So just as an example, and I hope this works. Okay, so this is going to give you, what you're going to see is just an illustration of the aggregated results, which are then averaged out for the original version, or the original image formats on the Gap site, so the Gap pages that we created. And so you can see the readout for just focusing on the happiness metric and how it correlates with how the page itself renders.
So as the graph rises on the y-axis, people are reacting. You're seeing, the facial encoding change based on their reaction to the image that's coming up in front of them.
Mm-hmm. So I'll just run that again in case you missed it the first time. And so we actually have a set of graphs for all of the different sites that we tested, but I didn't want to run you through all of these. This report is going to be available on the Radware website, and it's going to have a bunch of companion videos, including you'll be able to actually see the tests that the users saw, our webcam-enabled users saw, and see what they were asked to do and the tasks they were asked to perform. So what did we find? We found that, so looking at all of the data overall, the highest happiness rating was given to perfect image, and original came in second with progressive JPEGs, a close third after original, and that was the overall happiness scores. And I'm going to sort of break it down and kind of get deep, we'll break this down a little bit further. Looking at the results per website, so I don't know if you can see the legend at home. Basically, originals on the left for each set of graphs, and perfect images in the middle, and progressive JPEG is on the right. And what you see consistently is perfect image came out ahead, and then original second, and progressive JPEG. Again, you can see that close tie a little bit further with the gap, but again, pretty close results with the other two sites. And then, just taking it a bit further, we broke it down by gender. And this was interesting as well, because what we saw was that overall, women tended to express happiness more when watching the videos. And the results were a little more pronounced. But even, the somewhat less expressive male cohort, we still see the same kind of ranking, if you will, with perfect image, original, and progressive JPEG third. And then looking at the happiness averages per website by gender, it's basically sort of telling the same story, but we're really, trying to break it down for you so you can see where these this overall number kind of comes from. The thing that's interesting is if you look way over there on the far right, the YouTube graph, this is where we noted that perfect image actually scored lower than the other image formats, and in fact it was progressive JPEG and original actually scored a bit higher.
There's hope for us yet, Pat.
So YouTube crowd likes this version. Is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, especially with males. So first of all, this is overall happiness. You're going to see that we tried to drill in a little bit more with our hypothesis. But if you were to stand back and, what would I have intuitively thought would happen? I expected that because something showed up earlier, that we were going to get engagement earlier, and I thought we were going to see progressive JPEGs elicit more emotion earlier in the process. So, honestly, I was surprised, and I was, talking with Tammy. We worked with these experimenters, and we would go on the phone to these folks in London, and it was pretty, as you said, it became awkward because I really did not believe this. Like, it took me a long time to sort of digest and adjust to the fact that, a lot of time and energy in the world of FEO has been based on the fact that showing things earlier is always better. And so I was challenged here. Note, it's not 100% clear. There were cases where progressive JPEG did win, that showing things earlier was better. But by and large, especially with females, when we showed things to them directly, they wanted to see the whole image as fast as possible. That gave you the most emotional engagement. Yes, Mr. Steve Souders.
So it seemed like with showing babies and cute animals and cat videos, women had a more consistent correlation with their happiness than men did. Did you consider doing football, cars, and dogs?
Well, it's funny. It wasn't. We did talk about sort of what was going to go into the stimulus thing, and we did.
Yes.
We definitely saw that the gap thing with the babies was going to probably skew more female, and so with the other two, it was kind of more like, well, everybody on the internet pretty much. We were trying to find universals. So everybody on the internet loves cats. It seems, I don't know, maybe there are some naysayers.
Oh, Steve loves cats. I can see.
and then And then the funny video, or the funny like sort of greeting card images. We were just trying to go for generic things, and yeah, there was a lot of discussion over the sort of the nature of the images that we were selecting. Yeah.
The experimenters really urged us to choose images that had clear emotional value. The goal of it wasn't to experiment with all these types of images, but to try to figure out, depending on when things were showing, when the reaction came. And you can see in some cases, males reacted quite quickly and differently. So, I mean, there was evidence that the speed at which things appeared did have something to do with the emotional engagement. And they were trying to get very exaggerated emotional content images. That's why we had to change them. The original just shopping images of shopping bags or shoes just didn't do it. The idea was choose something that is universal and elicits a strong facial change. So a lot of the image choice was based on the advice of the experimenters, which had, they've been through this from a marketing standpoint a lot, and they basically directed us to something that would show the most significance. Remember, 2 to 3% difference is considered significant here. So in this style of experiment, we really had to rely on their sort of experience with what they were recommending. Mm-hmm. Again, trying it with less evocative images, like after we started seeing the results and challenging them, the next study and the next study started leaping to our mind, and you can, like I say, judge for yourself. There is a lot of variations and questions. In many ways, this brings up more questions than answers, and that's okay. We had to start somewhere. We did actually experiment with people, right? Like there wasn't just in the past, I've worked for years just on the theory that showing it earlier was better. So having something to at least question, we felt was valuable.
And just to add to that, the second test that we did, the implicit reaction test that we're going to talk about, actually was getting people to browse for consumer electronics. So that was maybe kind of skews the other direction. And again, it wasn't our primary test, but we'll get into that in a second and just to see how it validates what we did. Yep.
So, what is the eventual size difference, or the sort of the delta in time until the full picture shows up between the perfect optimized image and the progressive one?
It's different on every image, and we slowed things down quite a bit to exaggerate the effect. And that's why we were going to release the actual videos for you to see the sizes. Each one was different. The WEPI images were always the smallest overall. Sean, the guy sitting in front of you, created all the images for us. So maybe at the end, if you want to talk about the size of each one, that's why we were going to, you're going to want to know the difference between each and every one. We accept that. And so we'll post that data for you. In general, it was, Sean, what was the difference in size on average, do you think, between the WEPI image and the progressive JPEGs?
Some of them were quite dramatic.
Like more than 2x?
Yes, but there was a few that were like, the images were close to a megabyte, like 800K, and they came down to like 200K.
When they went to WEPI. So we were really trying to make sure that there was a difference when we didn't want it so granular that it was.
Like my question is towards how much you've kind of looked at this data, in depth. How much does it matter that the curve versus the eventual result? Like if it took, 2 seconds to see the first layer, whatever, 200 milliseconds to see the first layer of the progressive images, but it took like 5 seconds to see the full thing versus it only took 2 seconds to see the full thing.
So we're going to show you some of those exact graphs, I don't want you to steal all of our thunder, but that's that's exactly the questions we're asking. So we're apparently interested in the same things. Yeah.
One thing about just how our stimulus videos worked across the board is like in all cases, if you see them the graphs overlay, like the second by second traces of the data, it's not like the page with original images was that much slower overall than the page with the other image formats. It's like maybe a 1 or 2 second difference, and so it's yeah.
There was another question.
Quick ones, and maybe you have these coming.
was age also a factor? You showed gender here. And the second one will be with the redundancy, because you're repeating the same experiment again and again.
There's no redundancy.
Yeah.
It was each person was randomly given just one site with one image rendering format. They weren't given multiple image formats, for the same
And
site.
I don't believe there's any age separation. Is that do we have?
No, we don't have an age
Male,
breakdown.
female was all we got in
Yeah.
this experiment.
In the past, they've given we focused on 25 to 45, and they've known that was sort of our target demographic. But I don't know what that is. Yep.
So what again was the 0 through the 0.0 to 0.20? What does that represent?
So that's a good question.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh yeah. So what is the vertical axis? What does that represent? And so my understanding is that it represents a sort of an absolute value. So they're all kind of relative to each other in terms of just the happiness rating for each image format side by side.
So the
To rate each picture?
no. So
No.
this imagine there's a camera that's watching points on your face, and this represents the amplitude of the reaction effectively.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll show you. There's a few more graphs that kind of show. So for example, with the gap, with the happiness
This is
traces,
helpful.
you can see the second by second trace where, for example, with the original image is the red line at the bottom. I hope everyone can make out the colors. So basically, original is red, perfect image is orange, and progressive JPEG is yellow. And so you see that progressive JPEGs, there's that spike at the 3 second point because something's coming to the page, and then it drops off when as the image comes into focus. And whereas with original and perfect image, you see it's sort of the happiness grows. It increases throughout the second by second traces, and sort of plateaus around the top, or only kind of spikes and valleys a little bit up at the top.
So this is a good way to see everything overlapping. First of all, you see that the sizes of things in the rendering was similar in that we're still getting reactions, and obviously the progressive JPEG was showing something meaningful earlier because people were more emotionally engaged earlier in the process, but they never got as fully emotionally engaged with the progressive JPEGs. It's like they almost lost interest, or you had your chance, right?
Desensitized them.
Yeah, we desensitized
Yeah,
them.
it's a really good word for it. Yeah.
Do you think that the results may have been different and then artificially slowed the loading process? For example, that dip for the progressive JPEGs, that wouldn't have dipped so far down had the next layer loaded faster.
So we may just not have been able to discern any differences. So yes, basically we can probably do many variations where you're probably going to see less dramatic results. Basically, this is showing you the most dramatic or the most significant difference we could find so that we could really separate the data. I think that in the real world, as everything goes faster, you're just going to see that those lines are harder to differentiate.
I wonder if the lines would be completely different depending on speed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the only way is to run the experiment.
To be tested.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, it's good to bear in mind that these second by second traces end at 10 seconds, and just according to all the research that I've done on the top 100, top 500 e-commerce sites, for example, is the median load time is around 10 seconds. So there's for over DSL, not over cable. So these do have some correlation to how the internet works in the real world for a lot of people.
And we weren't trying to go way, way out. We were just trying to make it, like you were on a DSL modem, like where it's not instantaneous, you're not on a local network, where this would be less dramatic. And I agree, it's hard to theorize on what the curve would be in that case.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, we don't think we've closed the book on this question, and I don't want to jump to our conclusions, but this is it's a jumping off point for us to just even ask these questions and think about approaches for answering them. So similarly with Moonpig, we found that again, progressive JPEG it gets the earliest spike. You can see that little where it just sort of surges past that yellow line surges past the orange and red lines. But again, it has that early peak, and then it just goes downhill again. Whereas the other two techniques climb up and up. And with YouTube, what's really interesting is you see that progressive JPEG starts really high, and then it just kind of bottoms out, and then kind of trickles up again. And the other two techniques, kind of have similar kind of wonky, pretty active paths. I mean, it's really looking at that sort of that area beneath the lines where you see perfect image as sort of just having the greater area underneath the line, and sort of that being the representative of the sum happiness.
The fact that we see a similar trend on all the different sites, I think lends us to believe that there's more to the value of these curves than if we change them around, that we'd see something completely different. Mm-hmm. That's my theory. I really see that when I look at the data, and especially the raw data, that progressive JPEG gets this early boost, something's happening, but never achieves the same level of emotional engagement in this experiment.
And so this is just looking at comparing our happiness traces for all three sites for the different image ordering formats. The happiness trace is the orange line, and the red line is the heart rate trace. And you can see that there's a rough correlation between heart rate and happiness trace as well, which I just kind of put that out there to show that I think the more ways that we can look at this question and sort of see what the similarities are and what the dissimilarities are, it kind of lends itself to having a better 360-degree view of the issue. So this is a result summary. I put this more in here, I'm not going to read this all again to you. It's just for when we upload this to the internet, and here it's a good slide for people to follow along at home with. Do you want to talk a little bit more about the results before we move on to the next one?
I think you guys are able to come up with your own conclusions, just like myself. I was surprised to find that progressive images really, where I'd put a lot of effort over the years to make sure that they were, I was always showing the first pixel. It was less important. Now it was on to asking the experimenters, why was that? And we'll talk about that at the end, but we actually really did survey a lot of different folks that were more familiar with this type of experimentation to try to explain to us, why is this? Why is the brain doing this? Why are people reacting like this?
Yeah, I will definitely say, as the person who was on the call with our research team and Kent, the most hardened skeptic out there was probably on par with where Kent was at.
Many hours of my life have gone into this exact experiment, in a sense. In just the theory that it was it was better to show pixels earlier.
Okay, so
Why do you think the YouTube results were so different among males? Because I myself like to see cats hanging from ceilings. So it's interesting that it's so different from
any specific, I think the only thing we can really do is take a look at the results in general. As we try to drill into it, I think the results become less and less understandable. Mm-hmm. So I think the only accurate answer from us is we don't know. Mm-hmm. We're still trying to understand that. And my guess is, please debate it, in the community. We're trying to figure that out.
Some of it might have to do with people's expectations of YouTube, like some pre-existing sort of brand, brand issues that people might have. It might have to do with just the layout of the page, like just issues that aren't related to image format. So it's a hard question to answer. Yep.
So on the charts previous, the three lines for the three different images, how many subjects are represented by each of those lines? Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's about something like 87 or 88 subjects per line.
270 divided by 3, roughly.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
Okay, so, yep.
Last question. To Steve's point, just reactions in general from males, is it really, was it the subject matter, or is it just general across the board, regardless of what the pictures were?
It was,
People who do the technology,
the thing that was made really clear to us when we looked at the breakdown by gender, and when it seemed like, okay, well, the males don't seem nearly as dramatic as the females, is that, well, the female results were really dramatic, which you shouldn't look at the two in relation to one another and think that the male results were insignificant. They were significant enough. They fell within that 2 to 3% margin that our research team said, no, this is statistically important.
We were reminded of that constantly, because I just, every time I see a graph where the two lines are like this, and I said, is there a point of showing that? And he kept reminding me, 2 or 3% is considered significant results in this experiment, and that it's worth reporting. And then when we went to experts in the area, they did not debate the 2 or 3%. They were willing to speculate, I think, in some cases, on the results and what they meant. So you do need to consider that when you see these lines so close, in this field of psychology, it's considered a significant difference worth observing.
Did you look at other, so before you mentioned multiple properties of facial expressions, did you look at negative?
No, we focused,
like,
yeah.
Were people more frustrated with the...
No, just not enough money and time to, this was the easiest one.
So you only got, like, not knocking it, but saying the only metric you have is the happiness, and
exactly.
You have the other facial expression coatings, I guess.
Yes.
Exactly, yeah. That was,
there's many more very interesting results, though, and I'm looking at our timer, and I think you guys are going to be I'm even more fascinated by the next section.
Okay.
So I think you're going to want to know it. So let's keep rolling.
So before we talk about how we did this test, maybe just like you could give people a quick run. What was your hypothesis before about this one?
So this time, I mean, it's one thing just to have people happier, and my hypothesis and why would I use progressive JPEGs? Well, my hypothesis is if you have a task and the point of the task is to recognize something within the image, okay, that progressive or delaying when the full image was displayed will hinder your ability to do the task. But if what you're looking at is within the text on the page, that showing the image faster will allow you to look at the text earlier, and that will be better because it'll show up and you'll be more proficient at doing the text versus the visual task. So, my hypothesis would be that a text task should show clearly superior results when using progressive JPEG. Okay, that's where I started. Does anybody disagree? Doesn't that seem like what we should be seeing? Yes, any of the expert panel going to throw a wrench into that? No? Okay, let's see where we got.
So how many people here are familiar with implicit reaction testing or implicit response speed testing? Okay, a little bit. So it's predicated on this idea that if we see two stimuli that are related to each other and we're asked to associate them, we'll associate them more quickly if they're actually related to each other in our in our own thought. And it's a sort of famous example of that is you can identify colors faster if they're actually written in the same color that they are. So this test, we were able to get a much larger sample group, almost 500 testers, recruited online, and this time we showed them 2 different videos, the same 3 different image rendering methods, and 2 different task conditions, a text-based task and a visual-based task per Kent's hypothesis. And so what people saw was first they engaged in a priming task where they just sort of associated keywords with attributes, both positive and negative, with the brands, and the brands were Vodafone and Amazon. And we saw how quickly, just at a baseline, they were able to make associations between these attribute words and the brand. And then the participants randomly saw one of the videos for Vodafone that was one of the image rendering formats, and a video for Amazon that was one of the image rendering formats. And then we gave them the same association testing again afterwards, where we showed them the brand logo, the keyword attribute, and asked them how they got them to as soon as they saw the keyword, they were to click on a specific key. 5 minutes, thank you, Keaton, thank you very much. Okay, and the difference between our baseline test, our pre-test, and the test that we did after they watched the video, that's called the connection index. So the higher the index score, the greater the connection between the attribute and their experience with the website. hope that made sense. You'll need to download the report if you want to longer, or you can come to our office hour and we can talk about this in more depth with you there. So this was a sample of what they saw on the Amazon site. It's just, and so the tasks were to identify products or choose a product, and then later on, say something about the task that they were given that was either involved a visual cue or a text cue.
I think we should skip to the results as soon as possible.
Okay, there we go. And okay, so I've already explained what they did, and the results were, we saw that for original, once they saw the video where they were with the original image format, great. Perfect image, really great. Progressive JPEG, negative.
So this is with both the text task and this is an average between both of them in this case.
So this is our overall average. So we're going to drill down again. So overall task loading by gender. We see females are red, males are gray, and we saw that for original for females, it's a bit better. Males, quite a bit better. Perfect image, much better for females. Still better, but not quite as high as the females for males. And then for progressive JPEGs, pretty good for women. It was actually the second highest for women overall, and really, really, really negative for men, like really negative. And if you break it down further to the visual versus text-based tasks, you see where that negativity comes from. And it came primarily from the text-based tasks on the Vodafone site. So,
and the results are dramatically opposite the hypothesis I stated a moment ago, right? Look at the text task is showing that it's negative for progressive JPEG, which was very puzzling for me, very puzzling. Yep. And so I pushed really hard at this and tried to, as we go through the interpretation, I'd like to get to the interpretation as well. Sure. But this was very puzzling for me. I just didn't get it. Why is it that even on a text task, we showed things earlier, the text showed earlier, and yet people reacted so negatively? Like, I just don't get that.
And just to clarify, there were negative results across the board for progressive JPEGs on all the tasks. So for Amazon Visual, Amazon Text, Vodafone Visual, Vodafone Text. And the thing that was interesting as well was that original scored really, really poorly for Vodafone Text as well. So Dr. David Lewis he's a neuroscientist who consults with our research firm, and he's the chair of Mind Lab International. And he wrote a long appendix that's attached to our report, where, for him, it seemed really obvious, given what he knows about how the brain functions, that basically the words that sort of jumped out at me were just this issue of cognitive fluency. So anytime there's a multiple step process in doing anything, you lose cognitive fluency. So progressive JPEGs makes sense because we're giving people something. We feel like we're feeding that need for seeing something on the screen. But if you have to do it in a multiple step course, it actually, like, he goes into like elaborate detail and just like how much glucose your brain uses every time it does anything, and how we're frustrated because at some biological level we just we feel this glucose sort of drain that we're experiencing.
So,
sorry?
Is that available?
Yes.
Yeah,
it's attached to the report.
All of the data, we're really, form your own conclusions. My conclusion after listening to these guys is that your brain has this big easy button, okay? And anytime you introduce multiple phases or multiple steps and ask your brain, which figures out thinking fast, in 500 milliseconds, lots of your thinking happens. It's all unconscious, you're making all these decisions, and as soon as you have to just start digesting multiple phases of an image coming in, it's like they lose interest, it's more work, I give up on this. The easy button, they flip the bozo bit, I give up, that's it, we're done. So imagine your brain and the easy button. It wants to press the easy button all the time. It naturally does that. And if you introduce things that, however intuitively seem right, we're showing data on the screen earlier, if it actually involves requiring more work from your brain will actively steer the other direction. You have to somehow steer it towards, and that steering towards actually takes time. There you go.
Perfect. All right. So we save this time at the end for talking about how this affects performance, and I think we sort of addressed that throughout this talk. We don't have a definitive answer. We're not going to tell you definitively, go away, do this, don't do that. This raises new questions, but it gives you something to work with. It gives you something to think about, and
Yeah, when I look at this, I mean, we have in FEO a whole slew of treatments that are designed to help us get things to the screen earlier. And I'm now realizing that our brains they're giving people one chance. It's like first impressions are everything. So where I thought that delivering a first impression that was blurry but was showing that something was going on, now I might rethink that I might, tailoring the image to show something meaningful so my first impression can be a positive one. So just showing something and the first impression being bad, or that's not what I wanted, or that's not, I didn't see the cat, the cat's not, is this even a picture of a cat? Like, it's your question in your brain, it's just your brain wants something that it can make sense of quickly, and it's going to gravitate naturally to making those decisions.
All right. We have an office hour in 4 minutes, so come on over to the sponsor pavilion. We'll be over there.
Fill out your feedback. We need the feedback. It's really valuable for us to hear what you thought, what we should be expressing, other experiments you want to see us follow up on. This is something that Radware is sponsoring. We welcome the comments. Please come and see us. Thanks very much for listening.